Folks, I look out in the world today and I realize that people have lost the art of reconciliation. They've forgotten how to apologize. It used to be a universal language, and I don't know if humanity has never got it right, but it seems like we've gotten worse lately as a human race, particularly with regard to being reconciled to one another. Interesting thing about Christians, we love to come to church. We love to be reconciled to God. We love the message of salvation and reconciliation back to God through the cross of Christ. But when it comes to brother, sister to sister, brother to sister, we have a hard time being fully, truly reconciled to one another. So today I want to talk to you and remind you what Christ says about reconciliation and how important it is. And I ask you to consider in your heart and in your life today if there's a relationship that needs reconciliation. Ask yourself that question. And ask yourself, what do I need to do to make this right? Am I the offender or am I the offended? I almost said offendee. That's not a word. But ask yourself that question. And if you're one or the other, figure out what needs to happen to make that relationship right. I bring this up because what Scott conveyed to us in that memorial yesterday were wonderful, beautiful things about Eldon that we're all going to remember, but there was one thing, and we all kind of have that one thing that we need to get right before our day comes when we go to sleep. And that one thing with Eldon was he had a hard time reconciling some relationships. We don't need to get into specifics. I think if he were here today, he would tell you, go and make that relationship right. I believe that would be the first thing he'd tell you. And so in order to get to the lesson that Jesus teaches, by the way, Jesus teaches. He invites us to be his disciples. The word disciple and discipleship carries with it the idea of discipline. He wants to lovingly discipline us and teach us how to live and glorify God, and we should all desire to do that better. But we have to know that part of doing that is being reconciled. Part of glorifying God with our lives is being able and willing to put differences aside with people. Find common ground and get along for love's sake, for God's sake, for Christ's sake. The world's very dark right now. And if you get on Facebook for more than 2 minutes, you're going to see arguments over things. Even Christians, very mean, bitter, and angry with one another because they find themselves on different sides of political issues, or COVID-19 issues, or whatever the issue. Christ wouldn't have it that way. It's okay to disagree. I'm not saying it's not okay to disagree, but it's not okay to let disagreements sever relationships and put two people who both love Christ in particular, I'm speaking to the church, on opposite sides of things, to where they can't get along, they can't be around each other, they'll even avoid one another. It's not how Christ wanted it. So I want to remind you, before we get into that, of some of the things Christ said with regard to discipleship. Because we're all called to be his disciples. In Matthew 16, Jesus tells his disciples, and therefore they passed it on to all of us. He says, verse 24, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, that sounds like a message of self-sacrifice. Be willing to put your life aside and follow Christ, and it surely is. So remember it that way. But there's a key word in that one little verse I want you to hear one more time. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Jesus is inviting anyone, everyone, to follow him. Anyone's and everyone's create diversity. He's not asking just people who think this way. If you desire to come after me, take up your cross and follow me. Or not just people who think this way. On the other side of things, you take up your cross and follow me. No, he's saying anyone at all who wants to follow me. Jesus' offer is universal. To discipleship, to salvation, to transformation. He doesn't limit it to Jews. He doesn't limit it to one group of people. He gives that and offers that to everybody. And if you have everybody in and everybody coming after Christ, you're going to have diversity, differences of opinions. That's how God wants it, though. He wants us to have differences. As iron sharpens iron, sharpens the countenance of his friend. We have to have disagreements because we sharpen one another. Jesus' way of discipleship partly is to put us together and let us work it out. Because the Jesus in me and the Jesus in you will sharpen one another. I'll have something that I learned that you might not know, and you'll have something that Jesus gave you that I don't know. But if we can't get along and hear one another, rather than just talk over each other, we can't grow and be discipled. Paul says it like this, guys, in Ephesians. I didn't have this written up there, but my mind went to it really quick. Go to Ephesians chapter 4. Look at what he says about the body and how he puts us together on purpose with differences, diversity. He tries to bring a unity and does often bring a unity out of diversity. Here it is. Paul in chapter 4, starting in verse 15, he says, "But speaking the truth in love may grow up," that's us, the body, "may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies," because we all supply something different, "according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love." You hear what he just said? Paul's got a choppy way of speaking. He said, God puts different people together, and each person brings something to the table that the other doesn't have. And by bringing everybody together, we cause growth. We cause each other to grow through our differences. We get each other to think about things otherwise think about. That's an asset in the community of God, not a liability. You want that. You want diversity. But you can't have it. You can't benefit from the diversity if you're unwilling to hear someone out. James said, be swift to hear. First thing. Slow to speak, slow to wrath. Seek first to understand before you cast judgment, before you divide yourself from someone who could help you. It's particularly important that we in this community here with Springvale, with its lots of changes and constant changes, understand this. New people are constantly coming in and through. We have different people who come into the body for a season and leave. We need to be united. We need to look into the person with whom we disagree and find what it is that God put there, champion that thing, call it out of them, and let that affect us and help us grow. That's how God designed it. Some more scriptures. John, the Gospel of John, Jesus talks about discipleship, but he gives another one of those kind of universal words, universal implications when he says this verse and when he speaks to these people that suggests diversity because he's calling out a lot of people, different people. And in John chapter 8, Jesus says, verse 31, to those Jews who believed him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Disciple. You are people if you abide in my word. And remember, the word goes out to everybody, not just the Jews he was talking to at that time. But the word is offered to everybody. The Bible is the best-selling book. It'll continue to be the best-selling book. So many cultures and nations and different kinds of people have it. And any of them, if they abide, any of them abide in his word, they're his disciples. And they're willing to be taught and to change and to be challenged by him. But if that's offered to anybody, again, once again, you have diversity. Because he's not just offering it to one or two groups of people. He's offering it to everybody. Paul says it like this in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. With diversity, with regard to differences. They were disagreeing with some of Paul's doctrine at the city of Corinth, the church at Corinth. And he says this in chapter 10, verse 7, starting in the second half. If anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ's, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ's, even so we are Christ's. You hear that? Inasmuch as one person with whom I might disagree is Christ, I'm Christ as well. Christ's person, Christ's disciple as well. So you have two people, one sitting on each side of this box, on these stairs. They totally disagree. Wear the mask, don't wear the mask. COVID-19 can kill you. COVID-19 is just the flu. Black lives matter, all lives matter, which is kind of stupid anyway. I'm sorry, I'm saying that online. Nonetheless, you got them on both sides and they're both believers. We need to understand that inasmuch as this person is Jesus Christ, so is this person Jesus Christ. I hope that starts to change your perspective about people. Because if Jesus is calling everyone together, you're going to have differences of opinion. How far are you going to let those differences go is the question. In Matthew 11, Jesus says, starting in verse 28, "Come to me, all who are heavy laden, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Another universal word, "Come to me, all you who." And if it's all you who, that means diversity. So let me get to the point. I think you see that the gospel is universal and everybody is called to Jesus Christ to be discipled, which means you're going to have diversity. How do we deal with things like that? Because arguments are going to come up. You know, at one time, Paul had an argument and he had to separate from another disciple because the contention got so hot. But we find later they were reconciled. Jesus says if you're going to be my disciple, you're willing to be disciplined and taught. And one of the primary things he taught his disciples, knowing that they were a diverse group, you had Simon the Zealot, if you can turn to Luke, you had Simon the Zealot in a group with Matthew, the tax collector. These are part of the 12 that Jesus called together, his immediate disciples. Two people on polar opposite sides of things. Simon the Zealot hated the Romans. He was part of a guerrilla warfare group that tried to, through military tactics, physically overthrow the Roman rule in Jerusalem and in that region. The Zealot hated the Romans. Then you have Matthew, who was a Jew but worked for the Romans collecting taxes. Imagine how much Simon the Zealot hated Matthew. He couldn't stand him. But yet Jesus, I believe, purposefully brings them together. And one of the things he started to teach his disciples right away, probably because he had to, because they were so diverse, hated each other, was how to be reconciled. What was of utmost importance. And that was clearing up your relational issues before you move forward. Don't wait another day to do that. This is how Jesus says it in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 23, I'll start reading. It says, "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar." Leave it. and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Do you see what Jesus is saying? Your reconciliation to your brother or sister in Christ is more important than you coming to the altar to worship. That's chronological order he's putting it into. First, go do this. Then you can come worship God. Because if you still have that issue in your heart, you can't fully worship God. I know we have some differences. And I think about our brother, who we all love. Eldon would have loved this. He would have been praising God for this, because he knew it was true. Why is that so important? Same chapter, verse 14. That reconciliation is so important because Jesus calls us, his disciples, the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill can't be hidden. You don't put a lamp under a basket but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all those who are in the house. You could insert a, therefore let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. How can our Father be glorified? The God of love, the Father of mercies, and God of all, when his people who are called to best represent him, to bear his image, can't get along? They're divided, angry at one another. That's not light, that's darkness. It's so critically important, folks, that we get this. Here's some keys to reconciling. Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. This is Jesus teaching us, discipling us, disciplining us, teaching us what is of utmost importance. Here it comes. Jesus said, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Let me read that again. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him or her their fault between you and them alone. Don't talk to someone else about it. Don't speak of it at all until you go to that person face to face and start the process of reconciliation. If there's something you don't like even about someone, I will add to this. Not because Jesus told me to, but I believe, as Paul said, Jesus entrusted me with me, and I have the Spirit in me. If there's anything, not just if your brother or sister sins against you, but if there's anything that could be between you and your brother, you and your sister, go and talk to them one-on-one, face-to-face, without anybody else. You'd be amazed at how often that will create and cause reconciliation. Door open, crack it open just a little bit, so that forgiveness, reconnection can take place. Tell him his brother, but if he will not hear you, then you take one or two more, two or three, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word shall be established. I think often we skip to number 2 or 3 before we get the first one right. In Matthew 18. Then, if he refuses to hear you, verse 17, tell it to the church. And if that person refuses to hear all of us, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. So you have several steps to go through to be reconciled to someone before you get to talking about it with anyone or bringing people with you. In Luke 17, please turn there. This is another way to be reconciled. Similar, but he says it a little different. And I like the way Luke says it. He says it in a Roman, Gentile, tough kind of way. He says it this way, Luke 17, verse 3. Take heed to yourself. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. Holy smokes. Jesus just told us to rebuke him. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. You can nip it in the bud right there. How many times does someone offend us and we go home and stew on it and then we get bitter and then we avoid them in church and then all of a sudden they're our enemy? Just go deal with it. Even after church, go and rebuke them. Not scream at them and throw tomatoes or whatever. Just go and tell them, you hurt me. Be willing to be vulnerable, folks. That's how we grow. That's how we become one. Tell them, you hurt me. I'm sorry, but I'm man enough or woman enough to say it. You hurt me. And it wasn't right. It didn't sit right with me. 9 times out of 10, that person's going to say, I am sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. Boom. Reconciliation. And then that relationship will grow. There was a guy here some years ago that I had major differences with, and I finally went and rebuked him to his face, and then we became good friends. You believe that? If I would have just done the biblical thing. It should be so hard for us as Christians to do the biblical thing. Rebuke him to his face, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day returns to you saying, I repent, you shall forgive him. Not, you can consider forgiving him. You shall forgive him. You know why I believe it's set up that way? I've talked to you guys about this before. But I don't believe true forgiveness can be given until the offense has been stated. Once the offense has been stated, then the forgiver and the forgivee know the weight of the forgiveness. They know the value of the forgiveness. They know how much sacrifice is involved in that forgiveness. You can forgive in your heart. You can. If nobody asks forgiveness, if nobody comes and says, I've sinned, forgive me, you can forgive in your heart and let it go. I believe there will still be some distance, though. There will still be some bitterness. There will still be some things to get over. But if the offense is stated and you're eye to eye, forgiveness can be granted. You know the value and the weight of it. It'll be meaningful. I encourage you folks to take heed to this and to do this, because the truth is, we need each other. And we need to forgive each other. And we need to be one. Jesus' dying prayer was that we'd be one. Do you know that? John 17, before he went to the cross, his prayer was that they'd be one, that they'd stick it out, that they'd stick together. He said that for us. He also said it to his 12 disciples, 2 of which came from backgrounds totally opposite, who probably hated each other. God is witnessed and revealed and shown when there's unity. He's witnessed and revealed and glorified in a body where people reconcile and they get into the habit of reconciliation. We're messy. We make mistakes. People are fickle. They step on each other's toes. They say things often unintentionally that offend. You have a decision with regard to what you do with that. Jesus would say, rebuke him or offer forgiveness. Talk it out. Do it privately, one-on-one. I'm going to bring this up as an example, and then I'll close. At this meeting this year, me and James Patchen had a disagreement. And I made the mistake, and I asked forgiveness, and he forgave me of saying something to him during the business meeting, rather than doing the Matthew 18 thing and pulling him aside afterwards and saying, hey man, I don't agree. We need to reconcile this. I didn't do that. I've asked forgiveness. He forgave me. But after that meeting, James and I spent another hour in the side room and made it right before anyone else could intervene. There were other people who took offense for James, and then there were other people who thought, perhaps maybe I should have done what I did. Regardless of all that, James and I worked it out one-on-one in the side room, and I believe he and I have gotten closer since. Would you agree with that, James? You see, that's all it takes. I encourage you to do it because we are the light of the world. We are the hope of a broken world that really can't get along. And if the church can't get along, where's the hope? Where's the encouragement? Where's the leadership? We've been given a great responsibility, a great duty. Let's do that. If the worship team would come up. I'm going to close with the last verses on my list, which is in Romans, as a reminder to you to look at one another as an asset, not a liability, especially when you disagree with others. Question and ask yourself, are their differences something God would teach me through? Are the things that I disagree with and the things that give me the desire to divide and stay separate from these people, is that something that actually would help me grow? If we look at one another as assets, not liabilities, we will grow as a church. We'll grow in our relationship with God, and we'll grow in our relationship with one another. But reconciliation has to happen, and we have to remember that the people around us are there for a reason. God put them there, and He wants them there. They're there to help us grow. They're there to sharpen us. Paul says it like this in Romans 12, starting in verse 3. For I say through the grace given to me to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith, putting us on equal ground. For as we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same functions, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having then gifts differing, not just attitudes, not just beliefs differing, but even our gifts differing, according to the grace of God which is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith, or ministry, let us use it in our ministering. He who teaches in teaching, he who exhorts in exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. Let love be without hypocrisy, verse 9. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love. You see what he just did? He put us all together with differences on purpose, it's saying. On purpose. And I believe Paul, knowing that having all these people together was going to create division if they didn't learn how to reconcile and they didn't learn how to value one another. So he's teaching them to value one another. He's teaching us to value one another. Let love be without hypocrisy, and be kindly affectionate to one another in brotherly love. Be willing to be taught, be willing to reconcile, and we will glorify God in this church. I pray that you'll let Jesus disciple you today and continue to disciple you. Our differences are valuable. Let our differences challenge each other and change us and sharpen one another. Reconcile those relationships, folks. God bless you.